10 years vanished the day I walked into my sister's wedding unannounced, and not a single soul knew who I was. I'm Madeline Cooper, the forgotten daughter, the family's awkward shadow. But that day, wrapped in emerald silk and walking beside my fiancé, I wasn't invisible anymore. My mother's smile froze midair. My father dropped his champagne flute. And my sister? She turned pale beneath her flawless bridal makeup. Not because they were happy to see me, but because they hadn't seen me coming. What followed was chaos veiled under violins and wedding cake. I wasn't on the program. I wasn't part of the speeches. Yet somehow, I became the headline. The guest no one invited, but no one could ignore. Funny thing is, I didn't come to ruin anyone's day. I came to see if I still mattered, even just a little. I wasn't always the stranger in my own family. There was a time not so long ago when my little sister Sophie would climb into my bed during thunderstorms, her tiny arms wrapped tightly around my waist, whispering, "Don't let the lightning get me, Mads." Back then, she was my world, and I was hers. Our parents, Richard and Camille Cooper, were the kind of people who wore success like armor. My father ran a private equity firm that hosted gala dinners more often than family dinners. My mother was a lifestyle columnist who treated public perception like sacred scripture. But none of that mattered in those stolen moments between Sophie and me, when we danced barefoot in the attic or stayed up late, building Lego empires lit by flashlights. I was 6 years older, which made me the default babysitter, tutor, and, more often than not, emotional buffer between Sophie and our unpredictable parents. When our mother criticized Sophie's posture or our father barked at her for interrupting his calls, it was me who pulled her aside and whispered, "You're perfect, just like this." But somewhere along the way, something shifted. As we grew older, Sophie blossomed into the image of everything our parents adored: graceful, witty, photogenic. Meanwhile, I had become the quiet one, the one who stayed up late writing Python scripts, who didn't know the latest makeup trends, who preferred debugging code to brunch with socialites. Yet I never resented Sophie for it. I loved her fiercely. I helped her rehearse monologues for school plays, stayed up all night fixing her crashed laptop, and even took the fall when she accidentally broke Mom's favorite vase. She'd hug me afterward and promise, "When I'm famous, I'll buy you 10 of those." We'd laugh until we cried. Even when the comparisons started, "Look how confident Sophie is. Why can't you smile more like your sister?" I brushed them off. I thought they didn't matter because what Sophie and I had was real, or so I believed. By high school, our lives were moving on diverging tracks. Sophie was homecoming queen. I was the founder of the school's coding club. She had boys serenading her at lunch. I had professors emailing me about research internships. My accomplishments were invisible to my parents, intangible in their world of appearances, but I clung to them like lifelines. There was one night I'll never forget. It was the evening Sophie won a statewide pageant. Our parents threw a celebration at the country club. She was glowing in sequins, draped over her date's arm. I watched from the side, sipping a Coke, wearing the only dress I owned that didn't wrinkle in the wash. "Smile, Madeline," my mother hissed, pulling me aside as a photographer approached. "You look so plain." That was the first time I felt it, not just being overlooked, but being erased. Still, I tried to stay close to Sophie. I took her calls at midnight, helped with her college essays, even when mine were due. I thought that by showing up, by being reliable, I could earn my place. That maybe, just maybe, they'd see me. They didn't. But Sophie did, or at least I thought she did. When I got my acceptance letter to Caltech, early admission, full ride, I ran to her room, breathless with excitement. Her smile faltered. "That's amazing," she said, but her voice was tight. "I guess that means you'll be moving away." It struck me then maybe I wasn't her safety net anymore. Maybe I was just one more person leaving her behind. But I didn't have time to dwell. I had a future to prepare for. And deep down, I still believed that love Real love wasn't earned with trophies or beauty. It was built in Lego castles and flashlight promises. How wrong I was. That summer before I left for Caltech, I offered to spend it at home to help Sophie prep for her college applications, to be there for one last hurrah of sisterhood. But my offer was brushed aside. We'll be in Europe, my mother said, barely glancing up from her tablet. Sophie's doing a pre-college fashion tour in Milan and Paris, you understand. I didn't, not really, but I nodded. The day they left, I stood at the curb, watching the town car roll away with the two people I loved most. No goodbye hugs, no promises to write, just an empty driveway and a silence so loud it rang in my ears. I spent those weeks alone, packing boxes for school, fixing my resume, and wondering how love could fade so quietly, without even the decency of a door slam. I told myself they were busy, that it wasn't personal. But it was, looking back, that was the last summer I believed in unconditional love, and I would never be the same. College was supposed to be my escape, a clean slate, far from the judgmental glances and subtle dismissals, but distance doesn't always equate to detachment, especially when your family makes sure you never forget where you stand. During my freshman year, I called home every Sunday. At first, it felt like ritual. My voice would carry across states, trying to fill the silence on the other end. Mom would answer distractedly, putting me on speaker while she chopped vegetables or scrolled her tablet. "How's the computer stuff?" she'd ask, not waiting for an answer before launching into Sophie's new modeling portfolio or the details of their latest European getaway. "Your sister was asked to walk in a Milan show, can you believe it?" she said once. "The designer said she has that timeless bone structure. It runs in the family." I remember staring at the blinking cursor on my screen, listening to her voice fade into static. Bone structure. Not brains. Certainly not ambition. Eventually, I stopped calling. But the reminders found their way to me regardless, through Instagram posts of my parents visiting Sophie's campus in New York while I scraped together tuition money through part-time jobs, through family holiday photos I wasn't invited to, through Sophie's occasional texts that read like afterthoughts. "Hope finals are going well, Mom says hi." By junior year, I had learned to lower expectations. My wins, internships, scholarships, a research paper published, were met with emojis or generic thumbs-up replies. When I landed a summer job at a cybersecurity firm, I emailed my parents with cautious pride. My father's response? "Sounds intense. Don't forget to take breaks." But that was nothing compared to the year I returned home for winter break. Sophie was back too, glowing, as usual. At the dinner table, my parents beamed while she recounted stories from her internship at a luxury brand. When I mentioned a project I'd contributed to, a fraud detection tool now in use by several banks, my father nodded slowly. "That's good, Madeline. Though I still wonder what real-world value those things hold. Finance is always solid." I bit my tongue, solid, like the wall that had grown between us. Later that night, I found Sophie in the kitchen sipping tea. "You know he didn't mean it like that," she said softly. And I didn't. She shrugged. "You've always been kind of intense. Dad doesn't know how to deal with that." "Intense," I repeated. "Like ambition is a character flaw." Sophie didn't reply. The final nail came in the form of a birthday. My 22nd, I got a text from Mom at 8:03 p.m. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Sorry, totally swamped. Love you." That same day, she posted a photo collage of Sophie's recent shoot with the caption, "So proud of our shining star, beauty and brains." I wasn't in a single frame, not even a mention. It wasn't just that I was excluded, it was the casual way they made it seem like I'd never existed. I tried to rationalize, maybe they were busy, maybe they thought I didn't care, maybe I was being too sensitive, but the thing about being consistently invisible is it teaches you to stop expecting to be seen. What hurt more than their neglect was the way it was normalized. The way Sophie never defended me, just rationalized everything like it was a misunderstanding. like I was the one misreading it all. During one particularly tense video call, my mother sighed when I mentioned my plans to apply for a tech leadership program. "That's ambitious," she said carefully. "Just don't get your hopes too high. The world isn't always fair to girls in STEM." "It's never been fair," I replied, "but I've never let that stop me." Her silence said everything. Even extended family joined the chorus, unknowingly echoing the same script. "Sophie's doing so well, and you? Still doing those computers?" Aunt Jo asked one Christmas, as if I hadn't just had my first patent application approved. Those years taught me a brutal lesson. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't carved by cruelty, but by cold indifference. And that indifference, stacked year after year, can bury even the strongest resolve. But I wasn't going to stay buried. It happened during my senior year of college when I was at the edge of something big. I had been selected as one of 5 finalists for a national cybersecurity fellowship, the kind that led straight to Fortune 500 job offers. I'd passed 2 rounds of interviews and was gearing up for the final stage, a presentation before a panel of industry leaders. It was the culmination of 4 years of sleepless nights, broken code, and self-doubt. The same week, I received an unexpected call from my father. "We need to talk," he said. "Your mother and I have been reviewing our finances." I had chilled. "What does that have to do with me?" "Well," he paused, "we've decided not to support your graduate school plans." "I never asked you to," I said flatly. "I have scholarships and grants." "I mean long term," he continued. "We think it's more strategic to invest in Sophie's career. She's starting her own brand. There's momentum, and we believe in supporting what's visible." I was stunned. "So, you're choosing to fund Sophie's fashion label over my education?" "It's not about choosing," he said quickly. "It's about impact, visibility, ROI. You understand, right?" ROI, return on investment. That's what I had become. A spreadsheet cell that didn't justify further funding. "I've made it this far without your help," I replied coldly. "I'll keep doing so." But it wasn't over. A week later, Sophie called. She sounded chipper. Too chipper. "Hey, Mad, so I heard you were planning to apply to the Sentinel Fellowship." My stomach twisted. "How did you—" "Dad mentioned it." Anyway, small world. I'm dating one of the board members' nephews. We ran into the director at dinner last night. I sat in silence, a creeping dread blooming in my chest. "I told them all about you," she said brightly. "Don't worry, I didn't go into the tech stuff, obviously, but I said you were sweet and hardworking. Hope that helps." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. The next day, I was informed I hadn't made the final cut. No feedback, no explanation, just a form email. It wasn't just disappointment, it was betrayal. Not because I didn't win, but because for the first time, I realized Sophie didn't just outshine me. She undermines me. And whether she knew it or not, she had always been the favorite, the chosen one, the curated product of our parents' image machine. I was the background. Still, I told myself I'd move forward. The Sentinel Fellowship wasn't the only path. I picked myself up and pivoted. I threw my energy into a startup idea that had been brewing in my capstone course, an AI-driven threat detection platform that could predict cyber attacks before they happened. My professor encouraged me to apply for seed funding. One night, after weeks of perfecting my pitch deck, I came home to an envelope on my apartment doorstep. No return address. Inside was a typed letter. "Adeline, we urge you to reconsider your ambitions. Entrepreneurship is unstable and, frankly, ill-suited to your temperament. Focus on something secure." It was unsigned, but I recognized the phrasing. It sounded just like my mother. I didn't cry, not this time. Instead, I booked a one-way ticket to Seattle and withdrew from all campus placement offers. I was done waiting for approval. I was going to build something, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. Seattle was cold and unfamiliar, but it gave me something my old world never did: space. Space to think, to breathe, to exist without scrutiny. I crashed on a friend's couch at first, living off instant noodles and temp gigs while sketching out the architecture for my idea. There were days I doubted everything, my talent, my instincts, my future. But the betrayal I'd endured burned like a quiet engine inside me, keeping me warm when nothing else could. Then, an unexpected opportunity came. A friend of a professor connected me with a retired cybersecurity executive named Laura Mendez. She'd met me at a noisy cafe, reviewed my sketches, and said simply, "You're onto something." Laura became my first angel investor, not with a massive check, but with mentorship and one key introduction to a small VC group looking to fund women in tech. That's how my startup Firefly Protocol was born. I registered the LLC, pitched like my life depended on it because it did, and landed my first round of seed funding. My team consisted of 2 classmates from Caltech who shared my vision, and one overworked freelance designer I could barely afford. Every night, I coded until 3 a.m., my fingers aching, my eyes dry. I still had nightmares about my father's disapproval, about Sophie's dismissive tone, but I woke up knowing I was finally building something they couldn't touch. Months later, our prototype passed its first external security audit. A tech blog featured us as a startup to watch. I emailed the article to my parents, no reply. Didn't expect one. But the sting lingered. A week after the article went live, I received a voicemail from Sophie. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Hey, I saw the article, congrats. Really, I guess I didn't realize how serious you were about all this. Anyway, hope you're doing well." I didn't call back. Forgiveness would come later if it came at all. For now, I had code to write and a company to build. And that's when I understood something vital. Betrayal doesn't always come with a villain's laugh. Sometimes it comes with a smile, a shrug, and a suggestion that you play small for your own good. That realization broke me open, and from the pieces I began again. Success, as it turned out, wasn't a straight line. Firefly had potential, but it was still a fledgling idea built on borrowed time and credit. 6 months after our initial funding, we hit a wall. A critical client pulled out, citing market uncertainty. Our servers crashed twice in a month. One co-founder bailed to take a safer corporate job. I was left with mounting bills, a half-functional prototype, and a pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Worse, I was exhausted, not the kind of exhaustion sleep could fix. It was bone-deep, soul-level depletion, the kind that made me question why I'd ever believed in myself in the first place. I started having anxiety attacks, shortness of breath, sleepless nights haunted by imagined failure. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced the company was over, that I was over. To survive, I picked up freelance coding gigs at night while running Firefly during the day. My social life evaporated. I stopped answering texts. I missed birthdays, forgot to eat, ignored calls from the one mentor who had believed in me. The worst part, I felt ashamed, like I had no right to complain. After all, I had escaped. I was doing what I loved, wasn't I? But love doesn't shield you from burnout. Passion doesn't pay the rent, and resilience, no matter how lionized, has limits. There was one night, I still remember it, when I sat on the floor of our tiny office alone. The windows rattled from the wind. My laptop battery was dying. I had $216.00 in the business account and a rejection email from another investor blinking on my phone. I remember thinking, maybe Dad was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. I almost shut it all down. I opened the admin portal, cursor hovering over the suspend account button. Just one click and the pressure would vanish. No more late nights, no more weight on my chest, no more fighting for recognition in a world that refused to see me. Then a Slack message popped up. It was from Nina, our intern. "Hey, just wanted to say thank you for letting me sit in on that client meeting today. Seeing you lead made me feel like maybe I could do this too someday." This one line, but it stopped me because in that moment I remembered I hadn't made it this far just for myself. There were others watching quietly. I once had, wondering if they could build something too. If someone like them could lead. I closed the admin tab, opened my code editor instead. But it didn't fix everything, not right away. I still had to downsize the team. I sublet half our office space. I applied for a mental health grant for founders and started seeing a therapist, something I'd once dismissed as a luxury. Dr. Lee didn't offer platitudes. She gave me space to speak without apology, to cry without justification, to admit that, yes, I wanted to succeed, but more than that, I wanted to feel whole again. "You're allowed to be tired," she said once. "Even warriors need rest." It was the first time in years I allowed myself to exhale. That winter, something shifted. I learned to delegate. I let go of control. Not all of it, but enough to breathe. I took walks, I cooked, I called old friends. And slowly the panic stopped being daily. The doubt still whispered, but it didn't dictate. I wasn't healed, but I had hope. And sometimes that's enough. One of the turning points came unexpectedly at a small local tech meetup I almost didn't attend. I showed up late, makeup free, still in my hoodie from debugging a server issue. I didn't go to impress anyone. I went because I needed to remember what it felt like to be part of something. There, I met Grace, a fellow founder trying to build an edtech tool for underserved schools. We got to talking. Her startup was also barely surviving, her bank account as dire as mine. But her laughter was real, her resilience different, less brittle, more rooted. "We're all one bad month away from folding," she said with a shrug. "But if I go down, I want to know I went down trying." That stayed with me. I started showing up again, not just to pitch, but to connect. I met mentors who didn't talk about burn rate, but asked about sleep. I found a co-working space where failure wasn't taboo and where someone always brought snacks to meetings. And slowly the fire came back, not the frantic burn of survival, but a steadier flame. I redesigned our roadmap, narrowed our focus, and relaunched our core product under a new name, Sentinel Shield. Not because I was ready, but because I was willing. And sometimes that's what recovery really is. Not a triumphant march, but a decision taken again and again to continue. Momentum returned gradually, like the sun rising through fog. There was no single cinematic moment of triumph, just one steady choice after another. I began to trust myself again. Sentinel Shield slowly gained traction. A boutique investment firm signed on as a client after we detected an anomaly in their backup systems, a breach their in-house software had missed. Word spread, a few industry blogs picked up the story, then a regional bank reached out, then two more. We weren't an overnight success, but we were real. The first time I paid myself a salary, modest but enough to quit freelancing, I cried. Not out of pride, but relief. Relief that maybe, just maybe, this gamble hadn't been foolish, that my instincts weren't broken, that I had built something that mattered. My team grew to 6, then 10. We moved out of our half-shed office and into a co-leased floor downtown. The walls were still bare, the desks mismatched, but they were ours. I still wore hoodies most days. I still worked late, but I stopped apologizing for it. I started mentoring young women in tech, speaking on panels, saying yes to things that scared me, like leading a boardroom presentation in front of executives who barely hid their skepticism when they saw a woman enter with a laptop. I proved them wrong. More importantly, I proved to myself that I didn't need to shapeshift to succeed. Jordan came into my life during one of those late-night startup mixers I almost skipped. He wasn't flashy. He didn't name drop or network aggressively. He just asked real questions and actually listened to the answers. I like how your mind works, he said after we debated the ethics of predictive surveillance for half an hour. You don't talk to fill space, you talk to say something. We started as friends, then partners in every sense. He believed in what I was building, but never made it about him. When I asked if he'd join Sentinel as a UX designer, he said, "Only if you treat me like any other applicant." He earned his place and slowly earned my heart. There was a day I'll never forget, about a year into Sentinel's relaunch, when our predictive model caught a ransomware signature 3 days before any antivirus software flagged it. We saved a hospital's data. They sent a handwritten thank you note. I framed it. It reminded me why I started. The growth didn't make everything easy. With expansion came pressure, legal contracts, PR decisions, hiring policies, insurance, taxes. There were still weeks I felt underwater. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had a team, a partner, a purpose. Therapy helped too. Dr. Lee kept me grounded, reminded me that healing wasn't linear and leadership wasn't perfection. She pushed me to confront the part of me that still flinched at praise, that still expected betrayal. You're not building in spite of your pain, she said once. You're building through it. That's resilience. Her words stayed with me. And one quiet morning, sipping coffee on our new office balcony, I realized something profound. I had become the woman I needed when I was 18. Not flawless, not fearless, but whole. And that was enough. Around this time, invitations started appearing in my inbox, alumni panels, venture summits, interviews with tech magazines. At first, I declined them all. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted the work. But Dr. Lee challenged that too. Visibility is not vanity, she told me. It's representation. You have a story others need to see. So I said yes to one, a podcast interview with a woman-led tech show. I was nervous, sweating through my shirt even before the first question. But then, mid-recording, the host said something that froze me. "You're the kind of success story I wish I'd heard when I was 19. I didn't have an answer, just a swell in my throat that I barely swallowed back. That episode went viral. Not millions of views viral, but enough. Enough that my inbox filled with messages from young women, queer coders, neurodivergent founders, people who never quite fit the mold. And suddenly, I wasn't just a CEO, I was a mirror. That realization terrified me, but it also gave me courage. I began laying the groundwork for something new, Coder Foundation, a nonprofit that would provide mentorship and microgrants to young women entering cybersecurity and engineering, the kind of support I had to scrape together with duct tape and grit. I knew from experience, sometimes the difference between quitting and continuing is just one person who believes in you. I wanted to be that person. And with Sentinel Shield stable, Jordan by my side, and a fierce, brilliant team behind me, I finally had the capacity to give back. Not out of guilt, but out of power. Real, hard-earned, fully claimed power. And I wasn't afraid to use it anymore. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope with gold trim, elegant, expensive, and utterly unexpected. Sophie was getting married. It had been nearly 10 years since I'd seen her, and even longer since we'd shared anything resembling closeness. The last message she sent had been a voicemail, awkward and unfinished. And now, this. I turned the envelope over in my hands, unsure what disturbed me more, the fact that she had included me or the possibility that she hadn't meant it. The RSVP card offered a simple choice, accept or decline. But it wasn't simple. The wedding was at Westbrook Country Club, our parents' temple of social validation, the place where I once stood beside a punch bowl, listening to classmates joke about how unfortunate it must be to be related to me. The place where my father shook hands with future senators while pretending I wasn't his daughter. And now I had been invited back. Jordan found me staring at the card the next morning. "Are you going?" he asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. It feels like a trap. Then go on your terms, he said, not to please them, not to punish them, just for you. As an armband. so I RSVP'd with a +1. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I prepared the way I would for a product launch, strategically, intentionally. I chose a gown in deep emerald, sleek and unapologetic. I worked with a stylist to update my look, not to impress anyone, but to feel exactly like who I had become, sharp, elegant, and entirely self-defined. The day arrived, gray and overcast, with a drizzle that gave everything a cinematic sheen. As our car pulled up to the country club, Jordan reached for my hand. Whatever happens, he said, you walk in as you. And I did. The lobby hadn't changed, a portrait of tradition and privilege, but I had. Inside the reception hall, waiters swirled with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Conversations buzzed in tight, curated circles. No one recognized me at first, and that was the most satisfying part. An old neighbor finally approached, squinting. You look familiar. Are you with the groom's side? Actually, I said, smiling calmly, I'm Madeline Cooper, Sophie's sister. Her face froze. Oh, I didn't realize. If you do. Then came the moment I hadn't fully anticipated, seeing my parents. They stood near the bar, laughing with some long-forgotten family friend. My mother in pale blue chiffon, my father in a navy suit that matched his ambition. When they spotted me, something flickered. Recognition, disbelief, unease. My mother's smile faltered. Madeline? It's good to see you too, I said smoothly. This is Jordan. Jordan extended a hand. Pleasure to meet you. My father recovered first, defaulting to civility. You look different. 10 years and a few 100,000 lines of code will do that. They laughed, unsure if it was a joke. Can we talk? My mother asked, already ushering me toward a quiet corner. No need, I said. I just came to celebrate Sophie, nothing more. I could see the questions in her eyes. Who I become? How had I done it? Why did I look so unbothered? Because I was. Then Sophie appeared. She was radiant in ivory lace, a walking headline from a bridal magazine. Her eyes met mine and something shifted. She paused mid-step, color draining slightly from her face. Madeline, she said quietly, you came. I was invited. Her groom joined us, tall and polished. You must be Sophie's cousin, he asked. I extended my hand. Sister, actually. He blinked. She told me she was an only child. Time slowed. Sophie stammered. It was complicated. It usually is, I said, calm as ice. Guests nearby turned to look. Whispers sparked like static. I could see it happening. The perfect day unraveling. Sophie pulled me aside, desperation in her voice. Why are you doing this? I'm not doing anything. I'm existing. That seems to be the problem. What do you want? I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. I wanted you to see me. And now you do. Before she could reply, Jordan took my hand. Shall we? We rejoined the reception like nothing had happened. I danced. I mingled. I accepted compliments from strangers who assumed I was someone important. Because now, I left before dessert, but not before slipping my business card into my mother's clutch. One side read, Madeline Cooper, CEO, Sentinel Shield. The other, visibility is power, so is silence. Use both wisely. That was my goodbye. Or maybe finally my hello. In the days after the wedding, I received 3 messages. The first was from Sophie, just a single sentence, you were right. The second was from my father, an email, formal and cautious. He asked if I'd be open to a conversation. I marked it unread. The third was from a young woman who had seen a repost of my podcast interview and read about Code Hurt Foundation. She wrote, I didn't know people like you existed. I'm applying to my first engineering internship because of you. I replied immediately. That, after all, was the only recognition that mattered now. Because real power isn't about revenge, it's about redirection. And I had already walked away from the shadows into something luminous. Mine. 2 years after the wedding, I stood on a different stage. The Coder Foundation had just hosted its first national summit, over 400 attendees, 20 breakout panels, and a waiting list that crashed our registration system. We were tired, overwhelmed, and exhilarated. I opened the final keynote in a modest blazer and sneakers, standing before an audience of young women who looked like who I used to be: curious, hungry, quietly brilliant. My voice didn't shake. I know what it's like to sit in the back row, I told them, to feel invisible, to be told your dreams are too much or not enough. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to fit their mold to matter. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute, not for me, but for what we had built together. Later that evening, I slipped away to the green room, needing a breath. That's when I saw the envelope. It was handwritten, no return address, inside a card: "You've changed more lives than you know. Thank you for not giving up." It wasn't signed. I didn't need to know who sent it, because I knew it was true. Back home, Jordan greeted me with tea and a grin. Our apartment wasn't extravagant, but it was warm, lived in, ours. He'd been tinkering with a new accessibility design for one of our tools, and I joined him on the couch to review the prototype. No fanfare, no spotlight, just the quiet joy of building something good. That night, I logged into the Coder Mentorship portal and found a message waiting. "Hi, I'm Aria. I'm 16. My school said I shouldn't study engineering because I don't look the part. Then I found your story. Now I'm building a robot arm for my science fair." I responded within the hour, because that was the legacy, not the titles, not even the company, but the chain reaction, one light sparking another. My family never fully came around. My father passed on joining any reconciliation. My mother sends holiday texts sometimes. Sophie and I email occasionally, strained but civil. And I've made peace with that, because some stories aren't about fixing the past. They're about claiming the future. Mine began in silence, but it ends in symphony. A month later, I was invited to deliver a TED Talk. The topic: Reclaiming the Narrative, How Rejection Shaped My Greatest Innovation. I walked onto that stage without a script, without fear, just the truth. When the video went viral, it wasn't because of my credentials. It was because people saw themselves in the girl who'd once been told she wasn't enough. At the after party, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 20. "I brought my mom," she said, voice thick with emotion. She never understood why I wanted to study computer science until tonight. That, more than any award or headline, was the victory. And as the years pass, I continue to grow. Sentinel Shield is now a global name, but I never forget its roots. Or mine. The messy, painful, beautiful evolution that turned survival into leadership. Each year, I visit schools, mentor students, sit down with women just starting out. I see in them the fire that once burned quietly in me. And when they ask, "How did you do it?" I smile. I stopped asking for permission. Because the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen was the moment I chose myself. And that made all the difference. 5 years later, a letter arrived at our Seattle office, addressed to me in neat, cursive handwriting. It was from Heather. She wrote from a retreat center in Vermont, where she'd enrolled in a program for women seeking to reconnect with purpose. Her words were raw, honest, in a way I hadn't seen from her before. "I used to think strength meant being perfect," she wrote. "Now I know it means owning your imperfections. Watching you build your life has taught me more than I ever learned at home." There was no grand apology, no attempt to rewrite history, just a quiet acknowledgement of the distance she was trying to bridge. I replied with a note of my own, encouraging but firm. I hoped she'd keep growing. I hoped she'd find her own version of peace. As for me, I had already found mine. Jordan and I bought a house just outside the city, a place with big windows and a garden where we planted cherry tomatoes and wildflowers. Some mornings, I'd work from the porch while birds sang nearby and the world felt simple. Showed her now sponsored over 100 girls annually, and we'd launched an app that connected them with mentors in real time. Watching those connections blossom reminded me daily why we'd started. On the 10th anniversary of Sentinel Shield, I stood before our expanded team, now 500 strong, and gave a speech that ended not with a mission statement, but with a question. What legacy will you leave behind, not in numbers, but in lives touched? Because that, in the end, is what mattered. Not just the success or the recognition, but the ripple effect. The lives changed not by wealth or prestige, but by someone daring to believe in themselves and then lighting the way for others. As the sun set behind the Seattle skyline, I curled up beside Jordan, a dog now snoozing at our feet. You ever think about how it all started? He asked. All the time, I said, and I wouldn't change a thing. Because from rejection, I'd built something real. From silence, I'd found my voice. And from being the forgotten daughter, I'd become the woman who remembered who she was all along. Years from now, when I'm asked to look back on the legacy of my work, I know I won't think first about the accolades, the interviews, or the millions in revenue. I'll think of the high school girl in rural Montana who emailed me saying Coder helped her see a future beyond her town's limits. I'll remember the mother in Lagos who messaged us, proud that her daughter was now a software engineer because of our scholarship. And I'll think of my younger self, the girl who once cried in silence, certain no one saw her value, and how I wish I could reach back in time and whisper, they were wrong, you matter, is what it means to reclaim a narrative, to take the pieces of a broken story and build something enduring, not just for yourself, but for all the others still waiting in the shadows, hoping to be seen. To them, I say, keep going. The world may not always be ready, but your moment will come. And when it does, walk into it with your head held high. Because you are never too much. You were never not enough. You are simply becoming.